GOP primary for the 2nd Congressional District. He grew up on the border and on both sides of the border, actually, with his family. He has a keen insight into both sides of the border. And we'll talk about El Paso and the terrible tragedy that occurred over this last weekend from a perspective nobody else has. And that's from Nick Pierson after these messages. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the John C. Scott Show. The Republican standard bearer for Congress last year, Nick Pierson, is with us 2 years ago. And by the way, Nick, actually for Congressional District 3, you won that primary in Congressional District 3, and nobody expected you to do that.
Well, I was a long shot and surprised people.
All right. As the standard bearer for the party, and the tremendous amount of experience you have living on both sides of the border, you have incredible roots on both sides of the border, you understand the border, your family is a part of it. This had to shock you what happened in El Paso, didn't it? And it has to shock all of us.
Oh, sure it does. Anytime something as tragic as these shootings occur, it scares people.
Is there a foundation of political rhetoric here that can be blamed partially on what happened in El Paso?
Well, gosh, I don't know that you can blame any of the politics at the moment for that, because these people have the little bit that I've been able to see as far as their backgrounds, they were having trouble way before any of the people that are running now were having anything to do on the influence of the country.
And what is the solution to this border problem? You talked about it as a congressional candidate. I mean, we now are talking about it again as some kind of means to start the conversation about immigration reform, but it just doesn't seem to be able to happen. Why?
Well, I think the main problem is that you've got sides that are entrenched ideologically, and they don't want to get together to come up with any solutions. I mean, we definitely need to know who's crossing. I've mentioned it before, but I've been at immigrant facilities in Sonora and had smallpox.
So you think that there's a health threat from the immigration efforts and illegal immigration efforts that's happening on our border?
I believe that if you just talk to the people that are on the ground there, a lot of the people really have different types of sicknesses, and that has to be addressed. I mean, certainly, somebody gets measles, that can affect their sterility. Smallpox isn't a fun thing to get. You've got a high incidence of tuberculosis, so it's a public health hazard.
As you've toured the border and you do business on both sides of the border, is it a dangerous place?
Really, what people tell me, and I've witnessed it. I mean, you stick to your own business, and if you see somebody that might be a cartel-type gang guy, you just look the other way and don't recognize who they are. You don't want to know who they are.
Right. Avoid them. Be smart, yes. Are the crossing times of the borders any better? It's still a couple of hours, isn't it, pretty much?
It's by chance. You might get through and cross in 15, 20 minutes. It might take you 2.5 hours. It could be the same way by car.
Really?
Yeah.
And that's a long time let that motor run, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
2 hours.
Yeah.
John's on our phones. John, you're on the John C. Scott Show with Nick Pierson, GOP candidate for Congress from Congressional District 3 from last year. Go ahead.
Yeah, John, speaking to John. John, I want you to recall that at the beginning of the Trump administration, he called for Congress to come up with immigration reforms, and they never did a darn thing.
You're right, they did not. You're absolutely right about that. We've been talking about this for a long time. It doesn't seem to get done, and it needs to get done.
And the Democrats are not even reacting to anything he's asking them to do. So whose fault really is it? So whatever.
Well, it's a terrible dilemma, but it has to be solved. Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Nick, you've watched this battle over immigration reform. What could get this started? What is it going to take? You're a leader.
Well, I think what it's going to take is the sides to go more to the middle. I mean, it used to be that you had moderate Democrats and you have more moderate Republicans. You do have some extreme Republicans, but in a way, the leaders in the Democratic Party have kind of a clique going on. And I remember it from high school. You'd have cliques that were formed, and if somebody dressed differently than the clique, or they said things differently, or they didn't do the things that the clique did, then they were ostracized from the clique. And I think there's a lot of peer pressure there. So we need to get people more to the middle and to think rationally and try to solve these problems, because they're serious problems, and it's going to take serious people trying to solve the problem rather than push a particular agenda that they may have to accomplish a certain goal to give them particularly more power. And that's really the problem right now, is you've got politicians that will do whatever and say whatever just to gain power.
You ran, obviously, for Congress in Congressional District 3 seeking the Republican nomination. You got that nomination. But still, it would have taken a tremendous amount of effort on the part of the Republican Party to grab that seat, because it's an Oklahoma seat. It has been dominated by the Democratic Party. It was drawn for Oklahoma.
Yeah.
It remains...
It's about 20% Republican registration and about 36% are Democrat registration and about 44 independent. So it's a heavy lift for a Republican in that district. It's an extremely heavy lift, and you have to have good funding. You have to have the funding to hire the resources, because you just can't get it out of volunteers.
Plus, it's an enormous district by size.
It's a huge district. I almost wore out a car.
I bet you did.
In that district, driving every week.
And of course, it stretches from the Mexico-United States border all the way north.
It's the East Valley and Phoenix.
Yes.
And all the way to the California border.
Yeah, it really is tough to campaign in that district.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to make up your mind about whether you're going to run again, you think, eventually?
Well, right now, I'm sitting back, and I never say no, but right now I don't have any permission from my the controller of the family to run, but I'm looking for candidates right now. We need good candidates to run for political office, candidates that aren't necessarily just looking to gain power, but they're looking to do some good in the community, and that could be Republicans and independents, or it could be Democrats.
So you're a part of the Republican Party's search effort, right?
No, I have my own search effort going. Okay. And I work with the party unofficially, but I'm doing my own efforts with a committee I formed.
Were you disappointed that the Republicans, because it's an open seat, did not put forward a candidate for mayor?
Well, it's a disappointment, but at the same time, you look at the reality, and that's also a heavy lift just based on the registration.
Because the registration is so overwhelmingly Democrat. What would you tell the next person to run for Congress in Congressional 3 if it isn't you? What did you learn from that whole experience that would be of some great advice to either yourself the next time you run, or somebody else? At
the moment, I'm not gonna comment on that because I'm liable to say the wrong thing. But all I would say is that it's a very heavy lift, and you better be very organized, and you better be well funded.
And but it is winnable, you think, with the right candidate under the right circumstances?
It's possible. It may have to wait till the redistricting, but it's possible. It's possible, and that's why I ran. And it's possible. I've
heard you speak passionately about your growing up and about your relationship with the border with Mexico, and your relationship with your with family members that are Hispanic, that are Mexican.
Yes.
It must disappoint you to see what has happened at our border. I mean, the razor wire has to disappoint you. I think it has to disappoint you to see the slaughter of the innocent at El Paso. I think it must disappoint you, no matter what, to see children taken from their parents under these circumstances, or children in cages. No matter how conservative you are, you still have a compassion for people. Those are not compassionate things that we've witnessed at the border.
Well, it makes you sad when you see people in unfortunate circumstances trying to make it to the United States. It's almost they can win the lottery, I suppose, if they get here, and that's really at the heart of it. And on the other end of that, we need to try to perhaps help those countries, because it's going to be more economical to try to make some changes in those countries. But there's so much corruption in those countries that you have to be careful with the foreign aid, and certainly the cartels and the gangs are a lot more prevalent there.
Yeah, and we withdrew aid from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, which I thought was probably strange. Maybe it was misplaced. But the point is, if we can build that economy to help people stay in their countries, there would not be this great push to walk all across Mexico and try to enter the country here. Are you optimistic we're going to solve the problem at the border, whether it's Trump's wall or whether it's legislation, or is this just going to go on and on endlessly? And
well, I think the answer to that would be when you have both parties trying to preserve capitalism and our system that has made our country so successful. When you look at what's proposed now for the Democratic candidates for president, it's very alarming, and that to me is more alarming than any of the other things that you've just mentioned.
Speak of that, if you will. What bothers you about the Democratic primary?
Well, right now they're all talking about raising taxes up the wazoo. They're talking about more restrictions on our citizens. They're talking about more restrictions both for speech and on businesses, and that type of control borders on soft totalitarianism.
It's good to see you. Good to hear you talk again. I hope you decide to run. I think you are a great candidate, and I guess we'll just have to wait to see what your wife says, right?
Yeah, well, there might be something out there for me to do, John.
I'm sure there would be. Nick Pierson, good to talk with you.
John, it's always a pleasure. I always enjoy seeing you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Keith Rosenblum, our Mexico reporter, for being in our show today. Dustin Williams was with us. He's the school superintendent of Pima County. Worried about vaping, and he should be. I want to thank Dimitri Downing, talking about the new proliferation of medical marijuana all across this country. And we want to thank Jesse Lugo, as well as the former state senator Luis Gonzalez. They both opposed the Regina Romero campaign for mayor. Also, State Representative Pamela Powers-Handley was with us. And then Nick Pierson, the former GOP candidate for the Congressional District Number 3 in southern Arizona. This portion of our show brought to you by Perfection Auto Works at 1046 North Beverly. I want you to call, please, Mike Emery at 323-8650. There are hundreds of chances you have to make the wrong decision about where you get your car repaired. There's only one Perfection Auto Works at 1046 North Beverly, and that's the one I choose. I choose Perfection Auto Works because I trust Mike Emery. I think he's a fair guy and an honest professional. And each service tech at Perfection Auto Works is ASE certified. Customer reviews readily available. I'm proud to recommend Mike Emery and Perfection Auto Works at 1046 North Beverly. You can call him at 323-8650. I'm John C. Scott. I trust Mike Emery. You can too. Thanks for being with us for the John C. Scott Show for this Thursday. Coming back tomorrow on a Friday to wrap up the week. I hope that you will join us. This is KVOI The Voice, trusted local news and talk. Stay tuned next for the best local talk show in all of America. It's Keith Rittenhouse, Steve Rivera's Eye on the Ball. That's next.